Around the story of Teacher Minh Tue, joys and sorrows. In recent days, social media has been flooded with images of a barefoot monk with a shaved head, wearing a robe patched together from various scraps of cloth gathered from different places. He carries a self-made alms bowl, crafted from the inner pot of a rice cooker, walking along the national highway without a specific destination. Many say that this monk has been traversing the length of Vietnam for many years, going from south to north and then from north to south, reportedly completing 4 such rounds. He walks just to walk, without needing a destination. This monk is Teacher Thich Minh Tue. Teacher Minh Tue tells everyone that he is not a monk affiliated with any Buddhist organization. He does not accept disciples, stating that he does not dare to be anyone's teacher, but is merely a person learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha. He does not accept monetary offerings, only accepting food in the morning to eat at midday, known as noon meal, and takes nothing else. He also does not stay in people's homes, but rests and sleeps wherever the day ends, be it under a tree, in an open field, or even in a cemetery. When he sleeps, he only sits, never lying down. As I write these lines, Teacher Minh Tue's solitary footsteps are no longer solitary, as thousands of people now follow him, even surrounding him whenever they can. They walk just to follow him, without needing a destination. These observations are based on what has been seen and heard from afar, without yet delving into right or wrong, appropriate or inappropriate. Given the power of social media today, the number of people who have seen and heard about this has reached hundreds of thousands, if not millions. Therefore, the story of Teacher Minh Tue goes beyond mere observations of an individual's actions and has created a strong impression on those who see or hear about it. These impressions, whether positive or negative, depend on each person's understanding and perception, which naturally varies from person to person. However, among the many opinions and articles about Teacher Minh Tue circulating on the internet, they can roughly be divided into 3 groups. The first group opposes and criticizes, the second group praises and admires, and the third group expresses skepticism without making any definite conclusions. In reality, some writings fall into 2 or all 3 of these groups, with the author agreeing on some points, disagreeing on others, and even expressing doubts on certain aspects. Therefore, this article will not focus on anyone's specific opinions, but will highlight points that the author feels need to be addressed. It is quite rare for a single phenomenon to generate such a diverse array of complex opinions. This article does not aim to achieve a unanimous understanding of Teacher Minh Tue's actions, as that is clearly impossible. However, the author's viewpoint is that once an opinion is presented to the public, meaning it is shared with many people and not just kept to oneself, it is necessary to adhere to common standards. In the case of Buddhists, the highest common standard is the scriptures, not the subjective opinions of any individual. Thus, when faced with an issue, we all have the right to praise or criticize, but it is crucial that this praise or criticism is justified based on reasonable arguments rather than mere subjective feelings. This is because an individual's subjective opinions, when widely shared, can influence many others. If the influence is correct, it is naturally beneficial, but if it stems from inaccurate judgments, it will not be beneficial at all. Some refer to the phenomenon of many people following Teacher Minh Tue as crowd psychology, but this term is not accurate. Crowd psychology, informational social influence, implies that people participate in an event without their own intention, merely following the crowd, believing that the crowd's actions are correct. In the case of those following Teacher Minh Tue, we cannot determine the individual intentions or perceptions of each person, but we cannot generalize that all of them are simply following the crowd. Of course, there can be various reasons to discuss, but using the term crowd psychology in this context is inaccurate and may even offend many of those involved. Criticisms. There have been severe criticisms of Teacher Minh Tue for wandering around with a rice cooker, even calling him derogatory names. Some critiques, even from certain monks, argue that if he claims not to be a Buddhist monk, he should not practice alms, should not wear a robe, even if it is different from other monks, because it misleads Buddhists into thinking he is a monk. Some have gone as far as to use harsh terms like stealing the Dharma, stealing the monk's appearance. We will disregard such criticisms because they are entirely unreasonable, baseless, and so crude that any sensible Buddhist can recognize them as unworthy of discussion. The Buddha's teachings are open to anyone, even non-believers who awaken and wish to practice a part of the Buddha's teachings for their cultivation. No one is forbidden. Below, we will only address criticisms made to individuals who show a sense of responsibility and have a genuine intention for the community's betterment. These criticisms suggest that perhaps Teacher Minh Tue should not act this way, should not walk this way, and should not practice this way, as it would be better otherwise. Here are a few representative opinions of this kind. Wearing a multicolored robe and using a rice cooker inner pot as an alms bowl is not appropriate. Critics argue that even patchwork robes made from many pieces of cloth should be dyed one color and not be flashy, causing an unappealing image of a Buddhist monk. The alms bowl is considered a sacred object in Buddhism and cannot be casually replaced with a rice cooker inner pot, as this disrespects and degrades Buddhism. A monk wandering without a fixed residence is not appropriate. Critics debate that Teacher Minh Tue is not practicing the ascetic path correctly. He does not meet the requirements outlined by the Vinaya to be an itinerant monk. They argue that wandering and begging on the road as he does is not in line with the Dharma. Firstly, it's essential to note that Teacher Minh Tue has stated he is not a monk, not affiliated with any temple or Buddhist organization. He does not claim to be anyone's teacher, but is a Vietnamese citizen self-learning according to the Buddhist teachings. For such a person, these criticisms are misplaced, as a citizen has the right to do anything within the law, and the internal regulations of Buddhism do not apply to him. However, I still consider him a Buddhist teacher. This is my personal opinion based on what I have observed. Therefore, I will continue to consider whether such criticisms would be valid if applied to a Buddhist teacher. How could one eat 1,000 meals if they stayed in one place? A solitary figure, wandering as if strolling along a 1,000-mile road, isn't that an image of a Buddhist monk? Thus, it can be seen that a monk choosing to practice in a fixed place like a temple, monastery, or hermitage is familiar to most of us. Still, if someone leaves their fixed residence to practice in a non-fixed way, there is no scripture forbidding it. Similarly, Teacher Minh Tue practices alms in the correct manner, accepting only enough food to eat, nothing else, eating only one meal a day, along the 1,000-mile road which aligns with the Buddha's teachings. Is it correct to say Teacher Minh Tue practices the ascetic path? Firstly, I'm not sure if Teacher Minh Tue claims to practice the ascetic path. However, if that is the case, let's explore what the ascetic path entails. The Visuddhimagga and some Theravada scriptures mention the 13 ascetic practices, Dhutanga, as follows. 1. Wearing patched robes. 2. Possessing only 3 robes. 3. Begging for food. 4. Begging from house to house. 5. Eating only 1 meal a day. 6. Eating from the alms bowl. 7. Not storing food, not accepting food after having eaten. 8. Living in the forest. 9. Living under a tree. 10. Living in the open air. 11. Living in a cemetery. 12. Accepting any place as sufficient for rest. 13. Sitting without lying down. Based on these practices, Teacher Minh Tue's way of living can be seen as aligned with the ascetic practices outlined in the scriptures. Teacher Minh Tue's practice causing division in Buddhism. The idea that praising Teacher Minh Tue would diminish the respect of Buddhists for monks and nuns in monasteries because it suggests they are not practicing correctly is a completely unfounded comparison. First, Teacher Minh Tue does not preach or talk much with Buddhists, so the respect or praise he receives is entirely spontaneous. If Teacher Minh Tue's image evokes respect and faith in a large number of people, this respect can also extend to monks and nuns whenever they demonstrate that they are practicing the correct Dharma. This is not a matter of choosing one over the other. As long as Buddhists correctly understand the Dharma, there will be no mistaken judgments. If Buddhists do not understand the Dharma, the primary responsibility must lie with those who have assumed the role of teaching over the years. Therefore, in both cases, one cannot blame Teacher Minh Tue's practice. It should also be noted that Teacher Minh Tue's practice has quietly been going on for many years without causing any harm to anyone. If for some reason Buddhists lose faith in certain monks and nuns, it is necessary to reflect on those individuals themselves rather than blame Teacher Minh Tue. Practicing the correct Dharma is not the exclusive domain of anyone. The Buddha's Dharma is not limited to alms rounds or ascetic practices alone. There are many other methods taught in the scriptures, and with any of these methods, as long as the practitioner sincerely seeks liberation, devoted Buddhists will surely respect and revere them. Some have gone too far in comparing Teacher Minh Tue's alms rounds and ascetic practices to the case of Devadatta, who proposed 5 extreme practices rejected by the Buddha. This argument is entirely baseless. Devadatta actively proposed and advocated practices that the Buddha knew were unsuitable for all monks, hence the rejection. In contrast, Teacher Minh Tue, viewed by some as practicing in an extreme way because it cannot be applied to all monks, does not call on anyone to follow his example. Moreover, Teacher Minh Tue is not inventing a new practice as some mistakenly believe. Everything he practices is documented in the scriptures. Therefore, such accusations are unreasonable and short-sighted. In reality, we have indeed seen some division among the clergy due to this event, but accurately speaking, this division is only among certain monks and cannot be called a division of the Sangha. It has nothing to do with disrupting the harmony of the Sangha. A harmonious Sangha will become even more united through this event. The division we see is due to differing opinions among the monks themselves. Those who praise and those who criticize each have their views, leading to disagreements that are unrelated to a truly harmonious Sangha practicing according to the Buddha's teachings. There have been many words of praise for Teacher Minh Tue, and more evidently, thousands of people have taken to the streets to wait for him or to follow him, even accompanying him to cemeteries or open fields where he stops to rest. The reverence of Buddhists for a practicing monk is indeed a commendable thing. However, we all know that even when praising or admiring someone, that praise or admiration needs to be accurate and reasonable to truly hold value. In fact, for a genuine practitioner, undue adulation or worship can become a significant obstacle. I will not repeat all the praises directed at Teacher Minh Tue, but will instead highlight a few points that I believe are not entirely appropriate. The ascetic practices of Teacher Minh Tue are higher than the Vinaya, and only these practices lead to quick liberation. Many people have praised Teacher Minh Tue in this regard, but this point is entirely incorrect. Let us examine the Buddha's teachings on this matter to understand the inaccuracies. The following explanation will attempt to be based on the scriptures and Dharma teachings, not the subjective opinions of the writer. Firstly, ascetic practices, Dhutanga, are not a standalone practice. Therefore, if a person adheres to the 12 ascetic practices for their entire life, or even through many lifetimes, they will never attain liberation or enlightenment. Secondly, ascetic practices differ from the Vinaya, monastic precepts, and are not a higher level than the Vinaya, although adhering to ascetic practices might seem more challenging. The Buddha never taught that monks must follow ascetic practices to achieve liberation or enlightenment. Thirdly, ascetic practices are not the same as austerities. They signify renunciation, the abandonment of worldly desires and attachments, meaning these practices help practitioners rid themselves of greed, anger, and attachment. The ascetic practices can be challenging for ordinary people, but they are not as extreme or self-mortifying as austerities. The Buddha himself abandoned extreme austerities, so there is no reason he would instruct his disciples to practice them. Thus, if we refer to ascetic practices as austerities or extreme asceticism, it is a misunderstanding. For example, the 5th ascetic practice, eating moderately, cannot be considered an austerity. Some explain this as eating only a handful of rice. This is not the case. It means that if a monk needs more food to be full, he can choose a larger alms bowl. Conversely, if he eats less, he can choose a smaller bowl, sufficient quantity. The Buddha did not teach that practitioners should eat insufficiently but should eat just enough and know contentment. In the text, Instructions to the Monks by Master Kui Sun, it is said, 3 things should not be sufficient: food, clothing, and shelter. This means that if a monk needs 3 bowls of rice to be full, he should reduce a little, not enough, but not eat too little or starve. Thus, if a large-bodied monk needs 6 bowls, he can eat 6. But when near full, he should stop short of complete fullness. This is not austerity. Similarly, the 12th practice, resting only by sitting and not lying down, may seem difficult for ordinary people. However, a determined practitioner will find it manageable after some time without experiencing pain or hardship. This adaptability is due to the body's ability to adjust through training. Moreover, those who practice seated meditation know that resting in the correct meditation posture is feasible. Thus, this too cannot be considered austerity. Additionally, in this context, we must clearly distinguish between 3 different concepts. 1. Vinaya or monastic precepts. These are the rules that every true Buddhist must observe throughout their life. Lay practitioners follow 5 precepts, novices follow 10, monks follow 250, and nuns follow 348, according to the 4-part Vinaya. These precepts are mandatory, meaning that if one does not observe them, they are not considered a true disciple of the Buddha. 2. Meditation practices. The Buddha taught many meditation practices, and individuals can choose one that suits their circumstances. Some practice Zen, others practice Pure Land. Each practice should ideally be taught and guided by a teacher to ensure proper adherence. 3. Ascetic practices, Dhutanga. These are additional practices that a practitioner can voluntarily follow to enhance their spiritual practice. For example, during the Buddha's time, Mahakassapa practiced ascetic practices and was praised by the Buddha as the foremost in ascetic practices. The Buddha's praise implies that many others also practiced asceticism, hence the comparison. When a Buddhist begins their practice, the first and most important step is to take and observe the precepts. Due to its importance, the Buddha taught in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta that after his passing, monks must take the precepts as their teacher. A monk who does not observe the precepts is no longer a monk. After taking the precepts, a practitioner needs to choose a meditation practice, which is the path to liberation and enlightenment. The meditation practice helps us realize the 4 noble truths taught by the Buddha. Through meditation, we gradually reduce greed, hatred, delusion, and defilements, moving toward liberation. Finally, practicing ascetic practices is an additional method to support one's spiritual practice. Just as a vehicle with an extra engine can move faster, the 12 ascetic practices can greatly enhance a practitioner's progress. However, they are not standalone meditation practices, but supportive methods. Additionally, some aspects of the Vinaya and ascetic practices overlap. For example, the 4th ascetic practice, eating 1 meal a day, was applied to all monks during the Buddha's time, not just those following ascetic practices. Eating after noon, midday, is considered untimely against the rules. Or the 8th practice, owning 3 robes, was also applied to all monks during the Buddha's time. While 3 robes refers to 3 parts of a complete set, a monk can only own 1 set. The Buddha decreed that monks should not possess excess items. However, a monk practicing asceticism must make their robe from discarded fabric and wear it until it is beyond repair before replacing it. In conclusion, while Teacher Minh Tue's practice of asceticism is commendable, it is neither higher than the Vinaya nor the only path to liberation. He must have chosen a meditation practice alongside his adherence to ascetic practices. There have been numerous words of praise and admiration for Teacher Minh Tue, with thousands of people flocking to the streets to wait for him or follow him, even into cemeteries or open fields where he stops to rest. The reverence of Buddhists for a practicing monk is certainly commendable. However, we all know that even when praising or admiring someone, that praise or admiration needs to be accurate and reasonable to truly hold value. In fact, for a genuine practitioner, undue adulation or worship can become a significant obstacle. I will not repeat all the praises directed at Teacher Minh Tue, but will instead highlight a few points that I believe are not entirely appropriate. Praising Teacher Minh Tue while comparing and criticizing others. Many people praise and admire Teacher Minh Tue, but also compare him to others to criticize them. While this is not inherently wrong from a secular perspective, it is not advisable from a Buddhist viewpoint. First, when we praise and rejoice in someone's virtuous actions, it brings a gentle and pure joy to our hearts, earning us the merit of rejoicing. The Buddha often encouraged this practice, There are many good deeds we know of but have not yet done ourselves. When we see others doing them, we rejoice in their accomplishments. This is called rejoicing. Of course, seeing Teacher Minh Tue diligently practice the Dharma brings us joy and admiration, and praising him allows us to experience the joy of rejoicing. However, if we also start comparing and criticizing others, even if the criticism is valid, our initial joy diminishes. Thus, this is not beneficial for us. We can and should criticize wrongdoings that harm faith in the Dharma, but it is better to do so at a different time rather than combining two in one at this moment. Second, by using Teacher Minh Tue's image to compare and criticize others, we inadvertently create opposition and contrast, drawing him into controversy, which he has surely renounced. Logically, we should not do this. Emotionally, we inadvertently make him a target of envy and hostility, which is also inappropriate. Third, such criticisms often satisfy the critic's psychology, but lack persuasive power for others. In debate, to point out someone's wrongdoing, we must base it on objective standards, not comparisons with others. Specifically, if A is wrong, it must be because A violated certain correct standards, proven independently, not because A is wrong when compared to B. Therefore, to criticize convincingly, we should point out specific wrongdoings instead of making comparisons. As in this case, excessive veneration. Expressing veneration is each person's right and is not wrong. However, in recent days, the number of people admiring Teacher Minh Tue has grown to thousands, crowding the streets to welcome and follow him. This has clearly created issues. In many places, his supporters have overwhelmed the streets, causing traffic congestion. This excessive veneration clearly poses difficulties for Teacher Minh Tue's practice. He has been walking alone for years as his practice. Now, having to walk among a dense crowd daily, with no truly quiet and peaceful place to rest, is surely not what he desires. While the reverence of Buddhists for a genuine practitioner is commendable, more measured and reasonable expressions of respect would be more beneficial for his practice. Some argue that this is a test for his progress. While not incorrect, if each admiring Buddhist exercised reasonable consideration, they would likely not want to create such difficulties for him. Following him in such large numbers offers no personal benefit other than expressing admiration and respect. It would be better to channel that admiration into motivation for personal practice and self-improvement. By doing so, not only would we benefit ourselves, but we would also share in the merit of his teaching. On another note, many people have exalted Teacher Minh Tue as a living saint or as the Maitreya Buddha incarnate. This is a serious mistake and a significant deviation. For someone who has stated he is learning, such excessive veneration is not showing love, but unintentionally causing him difficulty. In reality, in this world where saints and ordinary beings coexist, even if we had the fortune of being beside a saint, we could not recognize it with our ordinary eyes. Simply based on what we have heard about Teacher Minh Tue, exalting him as a saint seems excessive. Moreover, such veneration does not aid his practice or ours. It is best to see him as a teacher who, through diligent and serious practice of the Buddha's teachings, has set a bright example for us to follow and learn from. Conclusion. The image of Teacher Minh Tue, bareheaded and barefoot, walking serenely along the road, gave me a vivid impression of the word "let go." In that image, regarding the needs of a living person, it seems there is nothing more to let go of. An inconspicuous robe that no one else would use, a rice cooker inner pot that if discarded would likely be ignored. And that's all, nothing else on his flesh and bones. Yet at one point he said, "I only have this life. If I stay alive, I will continue to practice." It turns out that life itself is the most precious asset he has yet to let go of, as he is keeping it to continue his practice. There is a good chance that the interest in Teacher Minh Tue will gradually subside over time. I hope for this, so that he can continue his quiet and joyful practice. Nevertheless, his simple and rustic image in recent days has left a lasting impression on me. I believe this is also true for many other Buddhists. We always feel lacking in one thing or another. But when reflecting on Teacher Minh Tue's example, we realize we have too much, even excess. Just this realization alone has certainly made our lives much lighter, both materially and spiritually. No matter how many times we read and understand the Buddha's teachings, we all need a living illustration of those teachings. This is the role of true practitioners when they appear in the world. The Buddha taught, the mind is impermanent, it arises and ceases differently. As ordinary beings, no matter how much we strive in our practice, we cannot be certain of tomorrow. 1 year, 2 years, or 10 years from now, we cannot be sure that Thich Minh Tue will maintain his steadfastness as he has in the past years. But that doesn't matter. A single moment of radiant wisdom is enough to help us illuminate the hidden corners of our own hearts. Each person's perfection still depends on their own effort. I am truly delighted with the opportunity to know of Thich Minh Tue's practice. Amid the numerous distressing distortions in the state of Buddhism in our country, his simple and rustic image sparks a glimmer of hope for the future. Thich Minh Tue said he never admitted that he was a monk. Mr. Thich Minh Tue said that he had been a monk but had no fate at the pagoda and felt that he was not worthy of becoming a monk because his morality had not reached that level. Noon, May 17th, on the journey from the north back south. Thich Minh Tue, his real name is Layan Tu, stopped to rest at an empty lot in Kam Ting Commune, Kam Xuyen District, Ha Tin Province. Hundreds of people gathered around him to listen to the conversation, including some men dressed like monks. When talking, Mr. Tu always calls himself Khan. Sharing with Veem Express, Mr. Tu said his hometown is Ki Tan Commune, Kian District, Ha Tin Province. In 1994, the family moved to Jialai Province to live. Previously, he had a short period of practice at a pagoda named Thich Minh Tue. Minh means bright, Tue is wisdom. The meaning of the name is the path of illumination. Later, when I felt that I no longer had any fate to stay at the pagoda, I went out and still kept this Dharma name, he explained. Mr. Tu said that he is not a Buddhist monk, does not practice, and is not a member of any pagodas or monastery of Vietnamese Buddhist congregation. Over the past years, he only listened to the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha and learned to practice the Duta rules. This practice has 13 ascetic methods, of which Duta rules is one of the highest and most classic methods of Buddhism. The Duta practitioners accept difficulties in matters of food, clothing, begging for alms, eating 1 meal a day in the morning, not accepting money offerings, refusing all comforts. To practice Duta rules, Mr. Tu started walking to many provinces and cities in 2017. At first, he sometimes traveled by bus. From 2020 up to now, Mr. Tu has always walked absolutely, only occasionally traveling by water and having to use a boat or ferry across the river. Up to now, he has set food in almost every region of the country. Only 3 provinces, Tay Ninh, Tra Vinh, Ben Tre, which have not been to, because these localities are not on the main street. My journey is to walk for the rest of my life. The purpose is to convey something, because everything in Buddhism has been taught by Shakyamuni Buddha. I just want to practice the Buddha's teachings to help perfect myself. When walking, I always wish for everyone to be happy and live happily with their family, Mr. Tu said. Mr. Tu shared that he used to doubt the Buddha's teachings, but now he is more mature and wants to study and follow those teachings to see if he can be happy and peaceful. When he decided to leave home and job to walk, he thought very carefully, then asked his parents for permission to leave. Because he was determined to follow Duta rules, while walking, Mr. Tu always picked up pieces of cloth thrown on the side of the road or in the trash bins, then sewed them into clothes to wear. Someone who intentionally threw them to him would not accept them. He only eats 1 meal a day. When traveling on the road, if he meets someone with a heart and a predestined relationship who sends him rice or water, he uses just enough. Passing through the river and stream, he stopped to bathe. In the evening, he often rests on the side of the road, and when he wants to go to the bathroom, he stops at gas stations. For me, all walking journeys are not difficult. When moving, if your mind is peaceful and happy, and you can overcome obstacles ahead. He said while walking, there were many people wearing monk-like robes following. Mr. Tu said they were not his disciples, but if anyone wanted to go with them, he would not stop them. Occasionally resting and chatting, he always advised them to remember to ask their family's permission. Whenever they didn't want to continue their journey, they could return home. And if someone distributes flyers or accepts money, then says I share it with them, it's not right. I take care of my belongings and don't need people to protect me or receive money on behalf. If they receive it, they will bear it. Whoever does it will accept the consequences and be punished, Mr. Tue said. Regarding the recent days, when walking through the provinces and cities surrounded by many people, taking photos and filming, Mr. Tue said that if people follow him to practice walking, exercise, and walk straight, it is good to be quiet and orderly. It's not a good idea to crowd together and push each other to record or stream live, causing chaos because creating noise will cause discomfort to those around you. Although he has not contacted his family for the past 6 years because he does not use phone or social networks, Mr. Tue shares that he always remembers his parents' gratitude for giving birth and raising. I always remember to follow Buddha's teachings to repay gratitude and pray for luck and peace to my relatives and friends. He has no material assets, but he believes in his relatives that he will never cause them suffering, such as breaking the law or affecting Buddhist organizations. Responding to the Executive Council of the Vietnam Buddhist Sonder, affirming that Mr. Tue is not a Buddhist monk, Mr. Tue said it is not related to the above document. For a long time, he had never recognized himself as a monk and felt unworthy of being a monk because his morality had not reached that level. From Lato Commune, Grai District, Gia Province, Mr. Le Xuan, 84 years old, shared that his family has 4 children. Leon Tue is the second son. After finishing high school, he joined the army. When discharged from the army, Tue transferred to intermediate school and then followed a friend to Fuyan to work as a cadastral surveyor for a private company. In 2015, Tue suddenly came home and asked his parents to become a monk for liberation. After a night of thinking, Mr. Swan and his wife agreed to let their son become a monk, but still advised Tue, if you have decided to leave, don't break the precepts, otherwise stay at home, do business, and get married. According to Mr. Swan, before leaving, Tue said he would study at a monastery in Saigon. Since then, his family has no longer contacted him. A few days ago, people in the village showed him videos that had attracted attention online, and Mr. Swan recognized his son. We feel sorry for our son when he eats hard and is skinny, but the family always supports him because of his fate. I hope my son has strong and soft feet, not be seduced by material things or money, and practice righteously, Mr. Swan said.